Good evening. Welcome to our Bible study tonight. It is a beautiful fall day. I know you're enjoying these temperatures as much as I am, and I'm so glad that you have chosen to join with me tonight for our Bible study. Tonight we are looking at the book, Dr. Claypool's book, Glad Reunion, which looks back at our Old Testament religious ancestors, and tonight we're going to talk about one of my very favorite ones, the person of Samson. The reason I love this story so much is because nearly all of us only have a fifth grade Sunday school understanding of his story. Samson was this bigger than life character in the Old Testament, and it really is a tragic story, but we tend to teach it and read it just on a very elementary level. And particularly when we do what we are supposed to do as Christians, which is to read the Old Testament stories through the lens of Christ and the New Testament, it totally changes what this story looks like. So join with me tonight as we talk about the person of Samson and how we can draw these truths not only from people in the Bible of showing us what to do, but learning from people's mistakes of what not to do, because that's really what we find in this person of Samson. Well, we're digging into our religious family tree here, and if you've ever done that on your own, you know what this looks like. You are likely to uncover some really good folks, but you're also likely to uncover some of those bad apples as well. And that's what we have here. I'll never forget one time I was very young, and Dad was going to do some business with one of his cousins that had to do with the coal business. And another cousin was coming through town, and Dad told him about it, and his response was something along this. He said, "Cousin, let me tell you, these people in the coal business are cheats and liars, and if you ever need somebody taken care of, you just come tell me." He's telling the preacher, if you need somebody taken care of. So, everybody has somebody like that in their family, and we certainly have these in our religious ancestry as well. Well, obviously, Samson had a lot of strength. He was incredibly strong. He was very attractive. He was probably very likable. He was the story of all kinds. He was the character in the story of all kinds of wild tales. One was that he caught 300 foxes and tied their tails together and set them on fire and sent them into the fields of the Philistines to burn down their wheat fields. Another was that the Philistines had put up these big gates to keep him out, and instead he tore the gates off and put them way up on this hill for everyone to see. These are the kinds of stories that you would think of when you're thinking of something like Hercules or Paul Bunyan, some of those things like that. Dr. Claypool says it's not just what Samson was, but what he was meant to be and could have been that cast a shadow across his story. He never really lived up to his potential. Why was that? Well, one basic question that answers that why many times is simply people who refuse to live an examined life. And that is certainly the case here. But we also get a little bit of insight into his parents. He was born into a particularly devout home. We're not told a whole lot about his mother, but we are told that she was visited by an angel when she was told she was going to have this child. She took what is called a Nazirite vow. And a Nazirite vow is an absolute dedication unto God, and it means that you abstain from any type of alcohol or strong drink, and away from any kind of food that would be deemed unclean. Sometimes it was done for a task. Sometimes it was done for a lifetime. In this instance, we see her incredible devoutness, because she not only takes it for life, but also puts this on the child that is going to come too, that his hair would never be cut and he would never drink any strong drink. So we know a little bit about his father. His father's name was Manoah, and he was someone who clearly didn't have a lot of insight into his religion, although he was devout. he had an encounter with an angel, and instead of it being a blessing like it was to his wife, he kind of interpreted it from the perspective of like a pagan and this old belief that if you ever saw God, that you would die. And it takes his wife saying, no, think about this. Why would he visit us, start this blessing with us, and then kill us? Why would God destroy what he has just proposed to begin? And I love the way Dr. Claypool describes this. He says, Manoah is a classic example, it seems to me, of a kind of piety that is uninformed by thought, of a religion that lurches from emotion to emotion without ever trying to think out the ways of God with humankind. Now, he says there's always a mystery and paradox at the heart of religion, but that does not mean that we should not try to make as much sense as possible out of what is happening to us religiously. I love this. He says, I believe that our minds are as much of a gift from God to us as our emotions, and that the command to think is just as valid religiously as the command to feel. I can't tell you how often I come across this in religions. They tend to focus on one or the other, either thinking or feeling. Think about the different kinds of churches that you have been involved with or seen. Sometimes it is almost all an intellectual approach. Sometimes it's almost always based on the feeling that can be conjured up through a religious service. And we know that we're given both of those for a reason. We need to use both of them. And I love the point that he makes that here. So he says it's entirely possible that Samson spent his whole life reacting against the emotional fanaticism of his parents. Could be. He says, as was true of the Puritans of a later date, religion in Samson's home may have become a matter of rigid authority and blind negativism. If this is the case, he would not have been the first to rebel against such rigidity and go to the other extreme. So that definitely could give us some answers here as to why Samson made the decisions or failed to make the decisions that he should have. He says he developed none of the characteristics seen in that devout mother by taking that vow, or serious father asking for guidance. He kind of tended to take on the bad characteristics of his parents. He says one definition of maturity suggests that one moves from seeing life as a jumble of isolated particulars to being able to see patterns and to organize these particular parts into some configuration of meaning. Once again, an examined life. If you're living an examined life, then you tend to see patterns that you can use to get better, to use to get closer to God, as opposed to just seeing them all random, as if people don't suffer from the same mistakes over and over again. We absolutely know that is what happens so often. Samson was very impulsive, and I'll never forget when I was teaching sociology, I would use this as an example. I'd say to my students, I'm either going to give you $5 today, or I'm going to give you $15 at the end of the semester. I want you to raise your hand if you take the $5 today. And usually about half the kids would raise their hand, and I would say, everybody look around. These are going to be the people that end up being criminals because they can't understand what delayed gratification means. That was kind of my funny way of teaching that. Well, Samson never got beyond the level of just acting in the moment, and he certainly never got to the level of living the kind of examined life where you have boundaries, because what we see in his interaction with Delilah is that he clearly never did his homework on her. He just acted impulsively with her. He clearly never bothered to inquire much of a question of who he was, and therefore he never looked in a whole lot to the people that were around him. He saw this woman as a pretty face, and one that could give him some kind of satisfaction, having no idea that she was plotting against him. So you remember the story. She seduces him and she manipulates him to finally give away his secret that his strength had to do with his hair. And as soon as he gave up that secret, she lulled him to sleep and cut off his hair, and therefore took away his strength. And he was immediately captured by the Philistines after that. Now, I love what Dr. Claypool says here. He says, "Give your life away, but don't throw it away," a wise man once said. He says, "But how can we do this if one has never come to terms with one's own secret?" Samson had not, and this, of course, was his undoing. He threw his secret away to one who did not really care for him, and she used it against him. The Philistines came and easily captured him, put out his eyes, and reduced him to an object of sport and ridicule. You know, anytime I talk about boundaries, I always get these looks of recognition on the face of the congregation that I'm preaching to, because everybody has to learn this lesson at some point. And many of us were brought up to kind of give people the benefit of the doubt, and we have to learn to get past that. We look at what is the reality of the situation. It's not that we prejudge them, we just go with what we find, with the facts. And if you've been a part of a church family like ours, you know that there are so many good people. Everybody is a mixture of light and darkness, and we have some people in our congregation, they're not perfect, but they're just as good as gold. And we have to remind ourselves that there are people at the opposite end of that spectrum. It's not that they are totally evil, it's just that they have a lot of darkness in them. And we have to learn how to have boundaries in our life in order to keep ourselves from being hurt badly by people like that. They are out there, and there's a lot of people who are very manipulative out there. And once you learn that lesson, then you get a little bit smarter about putting yourself in a situation where you can really be hurt. That is not at the expense of finding very genuine relationships where you can be vulnerable and grow in love. But this idea of doing your homework and going with where that leads you, and examine life, that's just a whole lot of what we see in this story. Samson did the opposite. He did not live an examined life, and he paid a horrible price for it. And we see the final tragedy in the end when he dies. Now, this is where you can really tell that we have taught this story from a third grade Sunday school perspective, because this is how we have taught it, and this is how we just kind of leave it there. The Samson gives his last prayer. It's a prayer of what he describes as a petition of anger and hostility and revenge. He paraphrases it. He says, "God, please God, restore my strength one more time, that I may give these dogs a taste of their own medicine." So the Philistines are mocking him. He gets them to put him in a place where his arms are on the pillars, and he prays for strength one more time, and he pushes the pillars apart, and not only does it kill him, but it kills more Philistines than he had ever killed before. And the way we teach it is that those enemies got a taste of their own medicine, didn't they? And we go, yeah. Now contrast that with the prayer that Jesus gave from the cross. "Father, forgive them. They have no idea what they're doing." When you take this story of Samson, particularly the ending, and see it through the lens of Christ and the New Testament, it totally changes it. At first, when we teach this story like a child, it's our enemies got a taste of their own medicine and they deserved it. But as we look at it through the lens of Christ, we see it as a tragedy. Here was someone who could have really helped his people, but because he lived an unexamined life, he died in tragedy. He says, "What a waste, what a tragedy." But thus ended the saga of Samson. He could have given his life away so effectively for the Hebrew people, but instead he threw it away. To be sure, There were some shadows in his family background that may have influenced him to live as he did, but in the final analysis, what he did with his life was his own fault, not his mother's or father's. So, we have to see ourselves this way as well. We have to understand that God has given us a source of strength and that He had that in mind when He created us, and He doesn't want us to throw it away. He wants us to give it away so that we can help the people that God places in our path. Think about that from a historical perspective. This idea of being able to pass down these incredible talents generation after generation, because we know the opposite can be true as well. Horrible things can be passed down from generation to generation. What is the key? It is living an examined life as a Christian. I hope this has been helpful and insightful to you, and I look forward to meeting with you again. Go in peace.